afternoon. Good afternoon, Jamaicans. Here in Jamaica, where this show originates from, we're broadcasting from the studios of Bridge 99 in Kingston, Jamaica. It is Jamaica Live. But good afternoon as well to the Jamaicans in the New York area, because we are carried, courtesy of Harry Jam, to the Jamaicans in the New York part of the diaspora. So good afternoon to all of you. Today is the 28th of November, the last Monday in November. December is upon us. Already we're beginning to hear Christmas music on the radio. It's amazing how time flies fast, particularly when you're my age. The start of the year seemed to have been just the other day. But you know, as we approach Christmas, I want to appeal to Jamaicans here and in New York, Jamaicans everywhere. Let's enjoy Christmas. It's the first Christmas that we are going to be able to celebrate in a normal way in the last 3 years, because Christmas 2020 and Christmas 2021 were affected or restricted in some way by the COVID measures that were in place. Well, those no longer obtained. So we're back to the kind of normal Christmas festivities and so on. But I want to appeal to all the Jamaicans. Enjoy Christmas. It's a time for family, for friends, for reflection, for enjoyment, for merriment. But let's do it in moderation, no? Have a few drinks, yes, but don't overdo it. You know, Christmas is not an excuse for drinking to the point where you can't stand up straight, and then you jump behind the wheel of a vehicle and proceed on the road and kill off people, maybe kill off yourself. That's not the kind of Christmas present you want to send to a family, to hear that their son or their daughter or their mother or their brother was killed in a car accident because some driver didn't know when to stop drinking. So let's do everything in moderation. Remember, and also the expenditure. We tend to go overboard, splurging, spending money that we don't have. Remember that come January, you know, the kids have to go back to school, and that one needs some money. And come January, the rent still has to be paid, or the mortgage, and the food still has to be bought, and that is going to need some money. So be moderate, be responsible, be sensible. Don't hurt yourself in the name of Christmas. That is not what Christmas is supposed to be all about. And remember that, God's willing, you will celebrate another Christmas next year. This is not the last one. So let us be responsible. Let us have a good Christmas. Let us have a time when we can all be happy and, you know, we celebrate with our friends and our families without some disaster, some bad news, some calamity that just mash up the Christmas for some people. Let's be sensible. Some of you have been watching the World Cup. I've been watching it too. I've never seen a World Cup that has produced so many surprising results. You know, you have a team that get a bad beating from an underling, from a low-ranked team. And then that team comes back and beat another high-ranked team. I've really never, you know, who could believe that Germany could have lost that opening match, for example. But and remember that the World Cup is not even at the halfway mark yet, so there's plenty of time for more upsets. I am not prepared to even hazard a guess, let alone place a bet as to who is going to win. Because based on what I've seen so far, any of a number of teams can still win. That's why I told Beauregard last week that I'm waiting until I get into the quarterfinals before I start making my predictions. But World Cup doesn't normally come this time of year. It was put off till November, December because the heat in Qatar during the summer is unbearable, over 100 degrees, which is not good climate to play football in. So it's kind of an added Christmas treat for us this year. But we continue to watch. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. It was reported recently that the term of office of the Political Ombudsman has expired, but that no new appointment is likely to be made. The position is a bit fuzzy because no official announcement has been made, but some comments reportedly made by government officials, including Minister Chok and Minister Chang, suggest that the functions of the political ombudsman could be transferred to or subsumed by the Electoral Commission. You know, we need to look back at the history of the political ombudsman. That position was established in 2002, that's 20 years ago. As is well known, Jamaica had a history of turbulent, even violent interaction between the two major political parties, the JLP and the PNP. The older ones among us can recall the level of political violence that took place, especially during the 1960s and 1970s. But a fundamental institutional change took place in 1979 with the establishment of the Electoral Advisory Committee, which eventually became the Electoral Commission of Jamaica. This removed the management and the conduct of elections from political control and manipulation, which were a major cause of the political violence that used to occur. As a result, the 1980s and 1990s saw a significant reduction in political tensions and political violence. But there were still incidents, provocative statements made from time to time, inappropriate behavior, and actually some skirmishes, especially during election campaigns. Just before the 1997 elections, the political leaders, the leaders of the major political parties, got together and they signed a code of conduct committing themselves and their supporters to ensuring a peaceful election. It was the first of its kind, and this led to the establishment in 2002 of the Political Ombudsman. It was established by law, by an act of parliament. And the Political Ombudsman, that position was established to be a sort of independent referee or adjudicator with the power to investigate any action or incident involving political functionaries, be they leaders, officers of the political parties, be they candidates, even supporters, but to investigate anything that transpired that breached the code of conduct or was likely to prejudice good relations between peaceful relations, I perhaps should say, between the political parties and their supporters. Now, there have been subsequent iterations of the Code of Conduct, the last one being signed by the political leaders 2 years ago. The questions that are posed by the recent reports are: 1. Are the functions of the Political Ombudsman still necessary, or have we matured beyond needing to have such a person in place? And if so, or rather, if it is felt that the position is still necessary, does it require a dedicated office? Or are those functions that are compatible with those of the Electoral Commission and should therefore be taken over by the Electoral Commission? The Political Ombudsman has statutory powers to investigate, as I said, incidents, behavior, occurrences that breach the Code of Conduct or negatively affect the relations between political parties. And these powers include the power to subpoena in order to compel any person to present themselves and to be questioned. But the Political Ombudsman has no power to impose sanctions. It can only recommend to party leaders actions that the Political Ombudsman feel the political leaders should take. And it is required to submit reports to Parliament on its investigations and on whatever recommendations it has made to the political leaders. And because of these limited powers, some people regard the office of Political Ombudsman as a paper tiger. It can chase you down and bawl you out, but it can't impose any sanction or punishment on you. So, you can, without fear of any consequence, you can kind of just tell the Political Ombudsman, go to hell. I mean, you have to respond to the subpoena, but when you appear before the Political Ombudsman, you can be as rude and as feisty and as uncooperative as you want to be, because the Political Ombudsman has no power to punish you, to impose any sanction. The outgoing Political Ombudsman, Mrs. Donna Parchment Brown, has repeatedly called for the position to be given more teeth, including the power to impose fines on candidates and parties. She also recommended that the Political Ombudsman should have powers to refer offenders to the DPP. I imagine that would be where their actions constitute a breach of the law. And she even called for the Political Ombudsman to have the power to recommend to Parliament the removal of persons deemed to be unfit for the office. Serious powers indeed. I would have difficulty with that one, because if someone is elected by the people to serve in Parliament, you have to be very careful, very circumspect about how you go about removing that person. That person is the choice of the voters. And while there may be circumstances in which that person becomes disqualified, some of which are already set out in the Constitution, I think you have to be very careful about expanding the basis or the grounds on which you can, in effect, repudiate the will of the people. Because what you'd be saying is that the people elected John Brown, but we decide that John Brown should not represent the people, so we are going to throw him out of Parliament. That is something that we have to approach with great caution. But we come back to the question as to whether the political ombudsman, with the limited powers that it has, with its inability to punish, to impose sanctions, with its inability to even require persons to even make an apology. Political ombudsman don't have that power. Political ombudsman can recommend to Andrew Holness, who is leader of the Jamaica Labour Party, or Mark Golding, who is president of the PNP, recommend to them that one of their members who made some outrageous remark should apologize to the people of Jamaica, or to apologize to the person to whom against whom the remark, who was affected by the remark. But that is all that the political ombudsman can do. If the political leaders decide that they are not going to take any action, that's the end of the matter. And then there are some legal issues that we must bear in mind. The Political Ombudsman Act states that it shall continue in force until provision is made for it to be incorporated into the Constitution. The intention clearly, at the time when it was put into law in 2002, the intention clearly was that the office of Political Ombudsman was not only to become permanent, but that it should be enshrined in the Constitution. Now, an issue of constitutional law is that no one parliament can bind a subsequent parliament. So if one parliament in 2002 took a decision and enacted a law to give effect to that decision, that doesn't bind the parliament of 2022 to accept that. The parliament of 22 has the power to go and repeal that act if its own thinking differs from that of the 2002 parliament. If the position of the political ombudsman becomes vacant, this is another provision in the law, the Governor General is required to make an appointment. But before making that appointment, the Governor General has to consult with the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition. Does not have to accept their advice, but required to discuss the matter with them before he makes a final decision and makes the appointment. Now, what does Sir Patrick Allen do now? The government may want to dispense with the office of Political Ombudsman. And as I said, it has the power to go to Parliament and have the law repealed. But until then, until that is done, the Governor General has a duty to appoint someone to fill the vacancy. What does the poor Governor General now do? The suggestion that the functions of the Political Ombudsman be incorporated into the Electoral Commission is not without merit. The Electoral Commission already has much greater powers than the Political Ombudsman. The Electoral Commission can halt an election and require it to be done over. It has quasi-judicial powers to regulate campaign financing. It can even impose fines. It can be argued that it has the teeth that the Political Ombudsman does not have. A question, however, is whether it would be overloaded, having to devote attention now to the behavior of political parties and their supporters, rather than concentrating on the management and the conduct of elections. The role and future of the Political Ombudsman, that is our subject of discussion for today when we come back. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. Producer, remind me when we can link with Beauregard. I don't want him to feel that I'm ignoring him or dissing him. He's too important a man for me to diss in any way. Today we're talking about the Political Ombudsman and the recent reports, which leaves considerable doubt as to whether that position will continue to exist. We're very pleased to welcome to the program to give us his own thoughts on this Professor Trevor Munroe. He's I believe the last time he corrected me, is the co-executive director of the National Integrity Action. Professor Munroe?
Good afternoon, Bookie.
How are you doing?
Good so far, but concerned at some of the developments, particularly relating to that announcement suggesting that the office of the political ombudsman would either be abolished or merged.
What are your thoughts?
Well, let me take up where you left off your initial comment, the issue of the overload of the Electoral Commission. But before coming to that, there's a very important point of process, doing the right thing in the right way. The Ombudsman Interim Act, or note the term interim in the law, clearly implies that the office and the position is established on the basis of consultation, and that the further actions in relation to the office, which are specified in the law, that it should be provided for in Jamaica's constitution. That's actually stated in Section 3 of the Ombudsman Act, that this action continue in force until provision is made in the constitution for the establishment of a political ombudsman, etc. So that I would have thought that prior to any decision, the proper way would be for the fullest consultation with the opposition, with civil society, particularly with groups like CAFE and others who are engaged and who have been very successful in helping Jamaica along the road of progress away from the days of political violence and the kind of conflict that the Ombudsman's office has assisted in reducing. So the first point I would urge that the minister involved, as well as the government, take on board, please, no decision until the fullest consultation. And in that consultation, the second matter arises, it is the matter of substance. Is it the case that the Ombudsman's office has so fulfilled the purposes of that body as to make it redundant in the terms that were proposed in a resolution by Member Warmington in September 2012? And my answer to that is that the case has not been made, particularly because one of the major objectives of the office, stated in the Code of Conduct, the Agreement and Declaration of Political Conduct, which the office was designed to police, is related to political tribalism. That's point number 7 in the Agreement and Declaration on Political Conduct. And the office was designed, amongst other things, to ensure, and here I am quoting, on ensuring that the parties eschew or abandon the practice of political tribalism. That is, officials who, by virtue of their positions, have control or influence over the appropriation of public funds or other public resources should not discriminate against any individual, group, or community on the basis of political allegiance or support. End of quote. A major purpose of the office, beyond the achievements in reducing political tension, misconduct around and leading up to elections, was to ensure that in between elections, political tribalism so defined would not continue. And I think it would be very, very difficult, if not impossible, for anyone to seriously argue in a convincing way that that element of political tribalism has been so reduced as to make the functions of the office redundant. My only point, the case has got to be made, the process has to be consultative, especially former Prime Minister Golding, where in September 2011, I was a member of the National Council of the Partnership for Jamaica, the Partnership for Transformation, of which you were the chairman. And it was brought to the council that, and it was celebrated by the council, that the cabinet submission had actually been forwarded to create criminal offences out of what remains a gentleman's agreement in the Political Code of Conduct. But more importantly, that legislation had actually been drafted in keeping with the letter of the Ombudsman Act, in keeping with the letter of other parliamentary commissions, the Electoral Commission number 1, the Office of the Public Defender number 2, the Office of the Contractor General, now subsumed in the Integrity Commission, that your administration had drafted legislation to give effect constitutional provision for the Ombudsman's Office, the Defender's Office, the Electoral Commission of Jamaica. So what we're seeing is a floating of an idea which would make a 180-degree turn on a 2011 decision of the government of the day with support of civil society and the opposition in a manner that would imply redundancy of the office of the Ombudsman in a way that I don't think can be proven, and in a manner that is unilateral and therefore unjustified in the circumstances. A bit of a long monologue, Bruce, but I think it's important to put those points on the table.
Well, let me pick up some aspects of it. You started out making the point, a very important point, that any such change, especially bearing in mind the circumstances in which that act came into being 20 years ago, any such change should require prior consultation, and nobody can fault you on that. I just mentioned, though, that when Warmington's resolution came to Parliament, I have a recollection that there were some views coming from the opposition benches that were not far from Warmington's views.
And that I wouldn't doubt. I don't have a clear recollection to substantiate, but I wouldn't doubt that there are persons over on the opposition side who may be sympathetic. But to that extent, it even makes it more important for
bring in civil society.
Consultation. Exactly, and civil society, which has played such an important part, starting with the churches, as you recall, in the whole lead-up to and from 1979-80. Fullest consultation before such a dramatic decision be taken in reversal of what had been previously intended.
Two questions I want to raise with you. One, has the political ombudsman been as assertive as that post requires in terms of laying out its activities? I found, for example, in preparation for this program, I sought to look at the annual reports that it has presented. First of all, when you go on the website, you see a report for 2012, nothing for 13, nothing for 14. There's one there that covers 2015, 2016, and 2017, 2018. In one of the reports, they reported that for that year they had received and investigated 17 complaints. In the other reports, I could find no such arithmetic. I could find nothing to say, well, for this year, these are how many complaints we obtained, we received. These are how many we investigated. These are the recommendations that we made to party leaders. This is the response that party leaders took in relation to these complaints. We regret that the actions taken by party leaders were not firmer than they were. I didn't see that sort of narrative.
And I'm sure that despite some good work, there would have been and remains room for improvement along those lines, Bruce. But it gives me no comfort to say that one of the main deficiencies in our governance arrangement is exactly that obligation to report to the Parliament and through the Parliament to the people. I don't want to divert the discussion, but we have 160 different public bodies now being justifiably reduced. But you know, of that 160 public bodies, if you go on the Cabinet Secretary's website now, you will find that 126 are in breach of the law, the Public Bodies Management Accountability Act, which says you must report within 4 months of the end of the financial year. So we have a very bad record.
Yeah, we do. We do. I remember when I was in office, I tried to see if I could bring that up to speed. And one of the things that I recall doing is that I insisted that a committee was to be established, chaired by the Deputy Speaker, that would be mandated and required to review these reports once they were received, because it's one thing to table a report in Parliament, but if Parliament pays scant attention to the report and the recommendation, then we're hardly better than when the report was drafted in the first place.
Exactly, and that was a proposal which I'm sorry to say has not been followed up on, despite many manifestos which have said that within 30 days, quoting from one of the political party manifestos, that within 30 days of the tabling of some of the more important reports, there must be a parliamentary debate. So there has been that kind of gap, and I'm sure that there could have been improvements in the content and frequency of the Ombudsman's reports. So that, yes, more might have been done, more could have been done, but you don't correct the deficiency by abolishing the office. You put in place measures to ensure that whatever deficiency was there is remedied, and that the office is strengthened to the extent that it's still required to deal with this cancer of political tribalism.
What do you say to those who seem to be suggesting that the Electoral Commission is far more equipped, far more experienced, has far greater powers to deal more effectively with the functions of the political ombudsman?
I respect that view, but when I look at the office, the law, enabling the Electoral Commission, the first point I want to make, that too, in 2006, and we are now in 2022, is stated as an interim act. The law actually says it's temporary provision, quote unquote, for administration of ROPA until provision is made in the Constitution. I'm deeply concerned, Bruce, that the intent of both the partisan administration prior to yours and your administration is that these very important parliamentary commissions should not be available to a majority in the House or the Senate to simply say, we're going to change this or that to weaken the body or even to abolish it. I mean, people say, well, it can't happen here. I look in the United States, and I tell you, 40 years of teaching, I would never have imagined that what's going on there in relation to elections and the rigging of electoral administration in a manner that we have left 40 years ago, that could happen there. So I'm very concerned that the interim act, whether it's the Ombudsman's interim, Electoral Commission interim act of 2006, Public Defender interim act, that these be provided for in the Constitution that was originally envisaged, before you then go on to load on more functions to the Electoral Commission.
Trevor, we're our own worst enemies. I mean, I try hard on this program not to be partisan, but I make that point because of what I'm about to say. Before I left office, I had identified those changes to the Constitution that had been agreed between government and opposition, which would include the placing in the Constitution of the Political Ombudsman and the Electoral Commission and so on. But it has to be entrenched, or is it not secure? And in order to entrench it, you need a 2/3 majority in both houses. And I don't know whether this was an opposition position or whether it was just an A.J. Nicholson position. But I mean, what I was faced with was that unless we are prepared to deal with the Caribbean Court of Justice, they're not going to agree to any amendment to the Constitution, which kind of just stopped me in mid-tracks, because I wanted to try and see if we could whittle down as much as possible the constitutional reform issues that remained outstanding.
An absolutely justifiable position, because as I have learned over the years, as one who in the early days of wanting to see everything change in a direction that will benefit the people, certainly in my opinion and others, the all or nothing position, Bruce, usually leads to nothing. And to that extent, you put forward a range of, I remember it's the 10th of May, 2010, that speech for the budget presentation, 14 or 15 different changes, some of which require constitutional amendment, as the ones you just mentioned, others of which didn't, and to some credit have been implemented. But things like fixed term for the Prime Minister, so that the Prime Minister wouldn't in Jamaica and no longer in England be able to just call an election when he or she feels it's suitable. A limited number of terms for the Prime Minister, so that no side of the aisle could say, I want this man for 20 years or thereabouts. So I think the entire system, including civil society and the people who are interested in deepening our democracy, needs to share some of the blame for allowing important changes to have lapsed and for everything or nothing positions to have left us in a state of affairs now, where we have an electoral commission, a state-of-the-art body fashioned by both sides and civil society. 2006 to 2022 is what? 12, that's how many years? Still an interim act, which tomorrow morning, and pardon my language, if we had a Trump in office, we could abolish the whole thing. That can't be justifiable, and therefore I'm putting forward the opinion that prior to any meaningful consultation to merge the Ombudsman Office with the Electoral Commission, already overloaded. You look at Section 6.1 of the Electoral Commission Act, you see 14 different functions. 1.4, dealing with registration, constituency boundaries, all of the stuff that we have been doing so well. And you are now going to add to that, dealing with political tribalism in between elections? No.
I hope you're not rushed for time, because I'm going to hold on to you while I bring on Carol Narcisse. I'd love to hear her views.
Sure, I'd love to be with Carol for a few minutes more.
Yeah, sure.
Hello, friends.
Hi, Carol. How are you?
Carol,
Very well. Good afternoon. Afternoon, Mr. Golding. Hi, Trevor. Good afternoon to you.
Hi, Carol. How are you doing?
Carol is a social advocate and development policy analyst. You notice how my introduction is very short?
Oh, stop it. This is just because, listeners, I had to introduce him and some other folks. They give me the bio and I go through some of it. He will not let me live it down.
What can I tell you? Carol.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about what appears to be the direction in which the political ombudsman is headed, which seems to be in the trash bin?
Yes. Well, I'm sorry I missed Trevor's comments on the subject, and at risk of repeating anything, there are commissions of parliament, I think, for a reason. That creating something with that institutional heft. So it's not just an ordinary organization that one would expect, can be opened and closed at one's whim and fancy. It's given the status of a commission of parliament to really signal, I think, to the nation that this is an important institution and it is answerable to the highest body in terms of, our policy making and law making. No, the interim act that governs it, as we know, is called an interim act. And I asked for the guidance of Dr. Barnett because I was concerned that a commission of parliament can be done away with by a government as it has a mind. And Dr. Barnett kindly reminded me that as the interim act intended that the commission, the Ombudsman Office, would have been entrenched in the Constitution. It says so in the Act, that the Act is in force until the constitutional provision is made. It is clear that neither of our parties have been so keen on having the interference and oversight of a political ombudsman's office, so that it was never, although the act was passed in 2002, we never did anything about making sure that it has a further constitutional protection.
Well, the Electoral Commission Act is pretty much in the same boat, isn't it, Trevor?
Yes, exactly the same boat. The exact same words are used, and therefore both ought to be in the Constitution rather than abolishing one to overload the other.
Carol,
They ought to be in the Constitution.
Carol, let me ask you this, Carol.
Yes.
What would you say, how would you respond to those who say, now look, at the time when the Political Ombudsman was created in 2002,
Yes.
that was a time when, although it had started to abate,
Yes.
there was still a high level of political tension and so on. Those were the circumstances that required that office. Today, they may very well argue that, sure, you know, we politicians will run off our mouth sometime, but we're certainly not at each other's throat the way we used to be, and therefore we need to rethink whether we need this position any at all, and if we need it, do we have to have a special office to carry out those functions, or would those functions fit neatly into the Electoral Commission, which has matured, which has far more powers than the Political Ombudsman has, and which already is dealing with political functionaries, so that it would fit neatly into their remit?
So let me start with the last point there as to whether it would fit neatly into the remit of the ECJ. To my mind, it would be like asking an accreditation body, let's say the accreditation institution for universities, right? It would be like asking the accreditation body to take on the additional task of arbitrating college-level quarrels, right? Disputes between one college and another. When the accreditation body is responsible for things of a systemic nature, things at a macro level. So I believe that the commission ought to be kept above the fray of the underground quarrels between party supporters, who painted what colors on somebody's sidewalk, who hung up flags outside in a community that is known to support another party. That level of dispute, as well as issues of in-between elections, any acts of victimization of a community because they voted the wrong way or so on, that those matters are to my mind not properly the concern. It's too much in the fray of the rough and tumble of the day-to-day relational type of issues in our politics.
Can you hold that point, Carol? The station needs to earn some money.
All right.
Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. Today we're talking about the Political Ombudsman. What is the future for that office? And we have online Professor Trevor Munroe and Mrs. Carol Narcisse sharing with us their own views on it.
If I may just pick up on one point. The code of conduct signed between the political parties, which the Office of the Political Ombudsperson is responsible for, adjudicating issues that arise from it. One of the areas is that the code that was signed to was the parties agreeing to not discriminate against any individual, group, or community on the basis of political allegiance or support by virtue of their positions and having control or influence over the appropriation of public funds and other public resources. Now, some of you had said, Mr. Golding, that some of the more conflict-ridden approaches to our political process have abated to some extent. But let us recall that the remit is beyond that. Now, there continue to be communities and constituencies that if you vote the wrong way, you're starved, your MP is, your community is starved of attention in between elections. Now, that is a matter of the code, so the Office of the Ombudsperson can exercise this, and the public should know that it can exercise this broader investigative mandate to ensure that every citizen is accorded, his or her, and every community accorded its due, and not to be discriminated against or victimized because they are associated with voting in a particular kind of way.
Well,
so it's not just the, it's not just the inter-party conflicts, it's also the ongoing life of people and how our political culture is operated in Jamaica. And these are not matters for the ECJ.
Well, in following up on that, let me put something to both of you. Both the last ombudsman, Donna Parchment Brown, and her predecessor, Bishop Errol Blair, both of them bemoaned several times the fact that apart from the power of subpoena, they had no power to effect anything. They could expose to the public, they could report to Parliament, but their effective quote-unquote sanction is to submit a report to the party leaders and to say, no, look, we found one of your members to be in breach of the code. This is the evidence that we gathered, and we recommend that you take the appropriate action, and we are suggesting that that action should be the following: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can't recall any situation in which a political party acted on it.
Let me say before I comment on that, please understand that Karen and I did not collaborate on our response to that point relating to political tribalism, which is absolutely on target. That tribalism continues. Ministers even say from time to time, you just Google the Gleaner, that it don't make sense to vote for the opposition because you now get nothing. So that it's not only a continuing practice, but also in some statements made to be a legitimate situation. Related to the specific question you asked, I recall, and I put it on the table for our electorate to be aware of, those who are listening, that in 2011, under your administration, the legislation was prepared to move the political code of conduct from a gentleman's agreement to a statute with teeth. And in fact, the recommendation was that the Representation of the People Act, Section 96, 97, and 103, dealing with illegal practices, would be amended to include specified clauses from the code, so that the Ombudsman's office would, in that context, be administering and investigating the breaches of law and not just of a gentleman's agreement. And related to that, the Ombudsman, successive ombudspersons, Bishop Errol and Donna, proposed that they have the power to refer matters to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, which would also strengthen their capacity to impact corrective action in relation to what would then become, in many instances, breaches of law and not just of a gentleman's code of conduct. So I think the case is there to strengthen the office rather than to abolish it, especially in a context where it appears that the initial idea was one that would go forward without consultation. So strengthen the office, put it in the Constitution, at the same time as the Office of the Public Defender, so that those will be operating in tandem to ensure that the rights of the citizens of whichever political party would not be breached by politicians or public officials which would use public resources to victimize and to punish on the one hand and reward political alignment on the other.
Well,
I have to leave you now, Bruce, if you would excuse me. I told you that I would go on for a few minutes, but I would want to have to leave now on time for the opportunity.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us.
All right, Trevor.
I'd wanted to say before Trevor left, though, why have the Trevor Munroes of this world and the Carol Narcisse of this world allowed the drift? I'm concerned, for example, at the government's sort of stubborn position in relation to the gag clause on the Integrity Commission. Yeah. And, I cannot for the life of me understand. First of all, the arguments that have been put forward, the reputational damage that I'm being told about, I think in fairness that a former contractor general I think he went overboard in terms of, it's almost as if his statements almost pronounce guilt on the part of the person who was being investigated. So I believe that there is some regulating that needs to be done there. But it wasn't until we discussed the matter on this program, I think, Carol, you might have been on that program, that I discovered that you can no longer go online to see what government contracts have been awarded.
Right. Jeanette Calder of Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal and I think were on. Jeanette made the point. So, but this is what we are seeing then is a pattern of bipartisan derelictions and collusion in the Parliament. So the Integrity Commission, the Office of the Political Ombudsperson, etc., that our Parliament, because there is, both sides agreeing to pass legislation with these unnecessary clauses intended to limit in their favor, not in the favor of the public, not in the interest of the public, but in the interest of themselves, to limit the powers and the oversight to the extent possible.
But are people like you, Carol, kicking up enough rumpus?
Well, first of all, I can just remind you, that we are all, we're citizens like every other citizen, trying to keep our heads above water. So we do the advocacy that we can, but the notion that a Carol Narcisse and a Trevor Munroe can make it their daily life's work forgets that we work, we have families, we you know what I'm saying?
But you need to light the fire.
Yeah, right, and we light such fires as we have capacity to do. And the general public must understand themselves too as having no lesser power nor voice than the Carol Narcisses have. And we must all begin to pay attention first of all, take an interest, read about what is supposed to happen and what is not happening, and lend through our churches, our community organizations, or whatever body we belong to lend our voices and to pay attention, because you cannot expect a small band of individuals to always be the ones to talk about everything that need to talk about.
I agree with you.
I know that I've reached a stage in my life where I cannot talk about everything that need to talk about. It's too tiresome now.
But
let me say this, though. I want to say this. The issue of the government can use its simple, the governing party can use its simple majority in the House to do away with a commission of parliament that has not had constitutional entrenchment. So they can go and they can do away with the commission, the Ombudsman office. But it is a precedent we should not allow to occur without our strong pushback from as many quarters in the society as possible. Because today it is the political ombudsman, tomorrow is what? The ECJ that you say similarly has not been given any constitutional entrenchment yet, and then the next day is what? So it would be a precedent that could then be extended to any other entity that a government does not like, and I'm not talking only about this government, because any government that comes, and so really part of what I am joining my voice to is a call for a consultative process, a reference to the Parliament about the Office of the Political Ombudsman, perhaps a joint select committee to which groups such as CAFE and others and general public can make our submissions on the matter, and a process for us deliberating as a society.
That's right.
As to how we might treat with this office strengthen it perhaps so that it better serves the nation's needs.
That's right, because what I hear you to be saying is that if an argument can be made that the position has become redundant, well, put that on the table and bring all the interested parties together, both inside and out of Parliament. Let's trash it out. Let us look at it.
Right.
Let us see what other views deserve to be taken into account. But I get very concerned when, you pick up the papers one morning and you hear that something that at one stage, when we were putting it together, we thought that this was a critical tool to try and improve the political climate in Jamaica.
That's correct.
And, to see it sort of just falling by the wayside. What happened?
And then for our lawmakers to not have given it teeth in the law and then criticize it for not having teeth is really,
but what happens?
Ingenious.
But what happens now? I mean, the law says that if a vacancy arises, the Governor General must make an appointment after consulting with the two leaders. What does poor Sir Patrick Allen do now?
Well, I heard Minister Chuck in a voice clip from, I think it was an RGR interview, in which he said, we will not be hiring, we will not be seeking to replace the person.
Well, with the greatest respect,
that
is not his call,
decision.
That is not his call. It's the Governor General's call, acting in his own discretion after consultation.
Sometimes there comes a time for what have been ceremonial offices, like the office of the Governor General, to exercise what is its inherent authority. And in this matter, it really ought to remind Minister Chuck that, he stepped outside of the provision.
I'm out of time. So Carol,
we really have to call on our government to respect the historical context as well as the present and future possibilities that we have for making Jamaica continue to evolve, model political systems and culture and process.
Carol Narcisse, public commentator, thank you so much for being on with me this morning.
Thank you for the time.
Good. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We're talking about the Political Ombudsman. That's a position that was created 20 years ago. Basically established to be a referee between the political parties, to try and adjudicate conflicts and differences that may arise, all in an effort to try to improve the political environment. Because remember, we're coming out of a history where politics in Jamaica was nasty, vicious, violent. I mean, people were killed because they supported one party or the other. And that office has been in existence now, as I said, for 20 years. Now, it may very well be that, we're turned big people now. We don't really need a political ombudsman no more. We get on with each other. We have little skirmishes now and again, but nothing too tough. That may be one view. But then, as Carl Narcisse and Trevor Munroe were pointing out before we took the break, one important part of the political code of conduct that the political ombudsman is supposed to not administer, but to monitor, has to do with the question of victimization. An MP who decides that him giving out some work for Christmas and is only his supporters who may be PNP supporters or his supporters who may be JLP supporters who go and get no Christmas this year. That would be a breach of the code of political conduct, and it is the ombudsman who would have to jump in, either on his own or her own, or if they receive a complaint from somebody that, look, Christmas work given out and there's only one set of people getting the work, would be able to jump in and investigate and so on. But the problem, as I pointed out, is that after they're done investigating, if they find that this MP give work only to his supporters, the most they can do is send a letter to the to the party leader for that MP and say, hey, your MP so-and-so going on with some nasty things out there, better deal with it. And the party leader can well put it in a file and say, no, I'm not going to trouble that at all. So one of the issues has been the toothlessness of the law and the powerlessness of the political ombudsman. And that may be what has sort of given rise to this argument that, look, we don't need the office no more. There was a resolution moved by Mr. Errol Wilmington back in 10 years ago, 2012, calling for the office to be abolished. And I think his resolution may have actually including or transferring the functions of the ombudsman to the Electoral Commission. We want to get some views now from someone who is ideally positioned to tell us whether or not that is a feasible idea, whether or not the functions of the political ombudsman, the adjudication, the investigation, the coming to a conclusion, and possibly the imposition of sanctions is something that the Electoral Commission would be able to take on. But I gather that Beauregard is online now. Bo, how are you doing? Hello.
No.
Hello.
Hello.
Coming to you, Errol, in a minute. Beauregard, where are you?
Yes, Mr. Golden. Good afternoon.
How is New York?
New York is warm today.
Warm today?
Yeah, in the low 50s. Warmer than the weekend. We had some showers yesterday, but we're all right now. Warming up again.
You call it low 50s warm?
Yes. For this time of the year, sir, yes.
If we have low 50s in Jamaica, we close schools.
Other than that, we're keeping warm with the World Cup that we see taking place. The African nations are actually doing good. Did very good this morning. So
I said Brazil just get through again.
Yes. And a lot of people are saying that Brazil is Jamaica's national team.
Yeah, but Brazil normally scoring 4 or 5 goals in a match. What happened to them this time?
I don't know. We have to see. And one of their top strikers are not playing, isn't it?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But I mentioned it earlier. I've never seen a World Cup with so many surprise results.
Right. And that's what I also want to see. I want to see some of these unknown nations, some of these nations that we haven't seen, perform in the World Cup in the finals. I want to see one of those teams at least get through.
Mix up everything.
Yeah, make the people them cheer for somebody else.
Beauregard, keep warm and say hello to all the Jamaicans up in New York for me.
I will.
We have now online Professor Errol Miller. Now, Professor Miller is a former chairman of the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, who was deeply involved in not just its administration, but in so much of its transformation from the Electoral Advisory Committee to commission status and expanding the powers of the commission to include, for example, campaign finance regulation. So we really would love to get his views on this issue of the functions of the political ombudsman being subsumed within the existing functions of the Electoral Commission. Professor Miller, thanks for joining me.
Good to have me, Mr. Golden. Happy to join you.
What are your thoughts on this? All of this arose because the term of office of the political ombudsman has expired. She had served 7 years as is provided in law. There's provision in law for that for her to be reappointed for another 5 years. I don't know whether age may have intervened because the political ombudsman has to vacate office at the age of 70. So I don't know the circumstances there. But it appears that there is a rethink, certainly on the part of the government. And I believe that there are some opposition members whose views are not dissimilar. There's a rethink as to whether or not we need to have a special office known as the political ombudsman. The suggestion seems to be that the Electoral Commission is quite capable of taking on those functions. What are your thoughts?
I think it would be a very unwise thing to do, to tell you the truth, especially when you can't identify what the problem is. A rethink by whom and for what reason. And my experience is that there are elements in both political parties that are not interested in any intervention of any outsiders than themselves, and that and I noticed it from the time I was there, would wish to take back and be everything to everybody, because their primary interest is power and not necessarily the interest of the people. So I would think that if you put the office of the Political Ombudsman within the Electoral Commission, you would be causing far more problems than you are solving, and precisely because of what you have said before, that's to its purpose. What I did when you had asked me, I got, that you would ask me today, I went back and did a little search on the whole matter of the ombudsman, because the ombudsman is an office, belongs to a certain category. I found, first it is the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and so on, that developed this office probably more than 200 years ago to mediate between the political office and the parliament and the citizens. I also found a very interesting article about its introduction in the Caribbean by Dr. Ina Barrett in 1985, when the parliamentary ombudsman was installed, with Mr. Errington Green as the first ombudsman appointed. And what the point she made was that the office of the, as it was called, the parliamentary, was not confined just to political affairs, but what could be described as bureaucratic arrogance in dealing with complaints of the citizen in terms of dealing with the bureaucracy of government. And there was great hope that would have solved problems. And the parliamentary ombudsman was actually established in 1978, at the same time that the idea of the EAC, with which you were very intimately involved, was being, deliberated. Now, the difference between the Electoral Commission and the Office of the Ombudsman is that the Office of the Ombudsman, as you have said, is largely to deal with a code of conduct voluntarily agreed by the PNP and GLP with respect to the conduct of their members. The Ombudsman can investigate, can make recommendations, but can take no action with respect to whatever they have recommended. Now, the EAC the Electoral Commission is totally different, and I want to separate the Ombudsman from the Office of the Ombudsman. For example, the Office of the Ombudsman is equivalent to the Electoral Commission. The Ombudsman is equivalent to the Director of Elections. Now, in the case of the Director of Elections and the Electoral Commission, there is law and constitution within which they work. And whether it is politician or not, they are not free to decide whether they're going to put it in or not. They are legal remedies. So the Electoral Commission belongs to constitution and law, and has brought some civilized behavior outside of the law and the constitution, based upon conventions and codes that have been developed within the electoral system, within which a lot of people are now complying. That does not apply to the Office of the Ombudsman. So you would be bringing politics into the commission in a way in which they can't deal with it, because they can only make a plea to the political parties, but they can't do anything about it.
Well, part of the thinking, I gather, might be, and I hope I'm not overreading, might be to transfer the function to the Electoral Commission and to buttress the powers of the Electoral Commission with additional powers to carry out the mandate in relation to the Code of Conduct, so that it would have teeth that the Political Ombudsman does not have.
But what is the difference between giving the very teeth that you would wish to give to the Electoral Commission to deal with that can also be given?
Part of the argument, I gather, is cost and duplication.
Cost and duplication.
Argument being that you already have an established Electoral Commission with staff, with experience, with reach. I mean, the Electoral Commission has a reach in every constituency. The Political Ombudsman does not.
But let us think through this a little further. Are you going to give more resources to the Electoral Commission to do that, or you're just going to add it?
I would assume so, but one of the things that would concern me, Errol, one of the things if I were a candidate in a constituency, I am dealing with a returning officer. We discuss matters and we have disagreements regarding selection of polling stations or appointment of polling officials and so on. But I believe that this returning officer, even though he does not support my position all the time, he's fair-minded. Mm-hmm. I'm a little worried about putting that perception of fair-mindedness in jeopardy. If he's now to start involving himself in some nasty statement that I made on a political platform about my opponent and having to make a judgment that I am wrong and I must apologize to my opponent in a situation where I have an election coming up in 2 weeks. I just think it may compromise the position because
without a doubt.
Because if you move it to the Electoral Commission, the director is not going to be able to take up all of these investigations himself. He's got to rely on his returning officers, no?
Yes. Let me say this to you. One of the things we established within the Electoral Commission, and this is in 2002, when the office of the Political Ombudsman was established, and we were going up to the 2002 general elections, we established the election center, which was the place at which all the official space in which all parties involved in the electoral process, not only the PNP and the GLP, but also the security forces, the press, the international and local observers, and the church, which helps in a lot of things, could be involved, and which you could issue authentic information on a daily basis between nomination day and election day. What we found extremely useful was to integrate the Political Ombudsman into the election center. And when the election center met each day as it did, if a political matter came up, the Political Ombudsman became the chairman of the election center for those matters, whereas the director of elections was the chairman of those matters that were electoral and involved the election system. Let me give you an illustration. For example, the two parties apply to the security forces, to the Jamaica Constabulary, to hold a meeting at the same venue on the same day, and if the police at that point makes a determination of anyone, the other one is going to be accused of bias. That matter comes to the commission. It doesn't go to the director of elections. It goes to the Political Ombudsman. And in the election center, there are trusted members of each political party, along with the security forces, along with the church and the observers, to which this matter is resolved, and they work it out. And the security forces is saved. The police is saved from being accused of bias. The very thing that you pointed out that could happen if it were a candidate talking about something you said. And during the heat of the political campaign, a lot of things can be said in heat, which throw no light but just add more flame to the fire, fuel to the fire. So we found the political ombudsman, and in that case, I have to say, very, very, very useful in separating politics from the elections. And I don't see why that same process should not continue with the two offices being independent. Let me tell you something. It is a matter that I'm very concerned about. I'm concerned about the lumping of these infrastructure of the state that we have established to move away from the winner-take-all electoral system that we inherited from the colonial days. And I know in speaking to you on that matter, I'm speaking as one who came to understand what you and other members of the JLP, along with members of the PNP, referred to Prime Minister Manley and leader of the opposition and former Prime Minister Siaga, tried to resolve at a time of great crisis. I am concerned about lumping these things together and talking about costs because we have to pay for our democracy, and political stability is the key to economic prosperity in going forward, and also to social cohesion. So the short-handed method that we don't have the necessity for it, we are deconstructing the very things that we have constructed to bring us to where we are. In fact, instead of moving forward, we are moving backward with that kind of thinking.
Having observed, as you just indicated, some of the work of the political ombudsman at the election center, would you be in support of this suggestion, which both the previous ombudsman and as well as her predecessor had repeatedly argued for, that they be given greater powers, because at the moment they're really a glorified whistleblower?
Without a doubt, not even, well, yes, I'll tell you what I would see as being very constructive. Because really and truly, when you look at it, the whole matter is about the discipline of politicians and their supporters. Building a more civilized culture, which requires a certain amount of self-discipline inside the political parties themselves. Now, in terms of the reality of politics, it's difficult, even if you're going to kick it up to the Prime Minister or the leader of the opposition or the head of both political parties. Particular politicians, because of the support they have from the electorate, can ignore either with impunity because they are representing constituents and their constituents are going to elect them, and therefore they can dispel it without any problem. So it is a problem for the political party itself. And I can tell you from personal experience, there are members of both political parties who are very difficult to control by the leadership of both parties. Therefore, it would be better to construct something with the office of the ombudsman in which there's a representative, a senior person that has personal authority in the party, because not everybody has personal authority that people will listen to. Because those are the kinds of persons that are to be appointed to the Electoral Commission. But you have more than two from each political party. I've come to respect people within both political parties and really having the deep interest of the country at heart. And there are more than two such persons.
One of the recommendations.
Independent persons to the office of the ombudsman that they can apply to that will help them with the discipline of their parties.
One of the recommendations that Mrs. Donna Parchment Brown made, and it's a power which I believe the Electoral Commission has, is the power to refer to the DPP breaches of the Code of Conduct. Of course, the Code of Conduct would have to be given legal status, no? And that was part of the thinking, certainly when I was in office, that it would be incorporated into law. And therefore, if somebody does something that is a flagrant breach of the Code of Conduct, the DPP would be, on referral, would be able to take action. Now, if I'm a candidate, I would, and I know this is possible if I mess around and I don't respond to the political ombudsman. The political ombudsman may refer me to the DPP, and next thing now I have to go appear in court. That would probably concentrate my mind wonderfully for a while.
Definitely. But I have to say, I am responding as a teacher, okay? And I would take it in a two-step further. Before I go to the law and the DPP, I would want to look at what an errant member of who is causing problems in a political party is seeking to do. And what I found most interesting, two things. One is when the person is just seeking attention, to ignore them, number one. But secondly, most important, is to frustrate them in the very thing they're trying to do. The business of criminalizing people's actions to me, is not the first step. It is the frustration in their intention, where the intention violates the public good. And in that regard, on many occasions, I'm saying this, when the EAC would have come, or the Electoral Commission would have come to a decision of all of us, a unanimous decision about a particular thing, and there were persons who refused to accept it, and I'm not going to name anybody in this matter, but when that happened, and it was very difficult to deal with it, and we have gone through all the processes, they would usually say to me, Chairman, you have to deal with that. And my method of dealing with that was to frustrate the persons in the very things they are trying to do by the very processes that are available. You see, in the same way that people can take errant behavior and persist to defeat the system that established, the system with its power can frustrate those persons and put them and harass them in the same way, not by saying that they are doing it, but by actually doing it. And sometimes even publicizing it. That is a power that I think before you go to criminalizing it and make the person having to go to court, I think we can strengthen the office of the Ombudsman such that through improving discipline in the two political parties, you have some very indisciplined people also. It's not a lot, but you have some. I've seen the conversion of some people talking about the Electoral Commission. You would be surprised to hear those persons repeating the same very lines that they are talking about the Political Ombudsman. They say that of the Commission, and I can give you documentary proof of that. So I think you need to strengthen. I would agree with strengthening the office of the Political Ombudsman, to put some sort of tribunal in that, and strengthen it within the political parties and working. Look, our political parties are some of the strongest agents of change and of moving the things forward and improving our democracies. This is one of the strengths that we have found in our commission in terms of what we have done as a country. In other words, what we have done as a country is not to exclude politicians and put them all on all kind of, and disregard them and talk to them about them in a very denigrating way, but rather to try to improve that, because they are the elected representatives of the sovereign people.
Good point to end on, because I'm out of time. Professor Errol Miller, former chairman of the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, thank you so much for joining me today.
And thank you, Mr. Golden, for inviting me.
Thank you very much. We take a break. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live on Bridge 99. Today we've been talking about the role of the Political Ombudsman. It's a position that has been in existence, creature of law, established by law as a commission of Parliament. And the Political Ombudsman was established to adjudicate conflicts that may arise between political parties and political supporters. And those of us who can recall our history, we have had some bad experiences there, political violence. And when it's not violence, it is tensions and defamatory remarks and that kind of thing. And the intention was, first of all, to create a code of conduct. And the first one was signed in 1997. And then there have been subsequent versions of it with amendments. And the last version was actually signed by the political leaders in 2020. And part of the job of the political ombudsman is to monitor the conduct of the political parties and their functionaries in relation to the provisions, the requirements of the Code of Conduct. The Code of Conduct has certain do's and don'ts. And part of the job of the political ombudsman is to call you out if you are a political functionary and you breach the provisions of the code. But as we were explaining in this program, the political ombudsman has very limited powers. He or she can summon you, can issue a summons, a subpoena for you to attend. And in that regard, the political ombudsman has the same powers as a judge of the Supreme Court. But beyond that, that is where the powers of the political ombudsman basically end. Beyond that, if the political ombudsman investigates a matter, in its incident of violence that occurs in a particular area, or some nasty, defamatory statement that may be made, some disparaging remark that is construed as something that would create friction and tension among political parties. The code says that the political ombudsman can investigate that and can issue a summons to you to attend and to answer questions. Now, having investigated it, if the political ombudsman arrives at a conclusion that this one is wrong, did something that ought not to have been done, what the political ombudsman does or can do is to write to that person's leader, whether it is Andrew Holness or Mark Golding, and said, look, I have investigated this matter involving your member. I found that your member was guilty of the following things. And I believe that this is something that ought to be punished. And I am recommending to you that you take appropriate action. In fact, I'm actually recommending that you punish this person in the following manner. Now, when Mark Golding or Andrew Holness get that, they don't have to act on it. They can tear it up. They can put it aside. They can ignore it. What can the political ombudsman do after that? Make a report to Parliament and say to Parliament, I investigated this matter. I wrote to the party leader. The party leader did not even reply to my correspondence. As far as I'm aware, the party leader has done absolutely nothing, and I'm bringing it to the attention of Parliament. And if Parliament don't lay it on the table quickly, the political ombudsman can publicize it, make it public so that the people of Jamaica are aware. But beyond that, the person who was guilty of the infraction gets off scot-free. So one side of the argument is that part of the dissatisfaction, if that exists with the political ombudsman, has been that we have not vested in the political ombudsman the requisite authority and powers to be effective. The counter argument to that is that, look, we are no longer in the situation we were in the 1960s and 70s where, political violence was rampant all over the place. And therefore we needed somebody to act as a kind of referee. We're big people now and we don't behave that way anymore, so we really don't need a political ombudsman anymore. We've been trying, since we started the discussion on this program today, to see if we can sort of dig into all of the arguments and to see, where we should come down. Because remember, the purpose of this program is to help you to think through these things for yourself. We're very pleased to be joined now by Mr. Horace Levy, who is a social commentator. He's a public advocate. I would even call him one of our most vigilant public watchdogs. And we're very pleased to have him on the program. I've had him on before, but we're very pleased to have him on to discuss this particular subject. Horace, welcome to the program. Not on?
You bring me on after all those heavyweights you've had. Good Lord.
But I don't understand. I mean, you are going to put the icing on the cake.
Lord of mercy, icing. You expect the tail of the dog to do anything to the dog?
Tell me, Horace, what is your view in terms of the reports that have come out recently that suggest that the political ombudsman will shortly be no more?
Regrettable. I concur with a number of your previous speakers that, if anything, the position of the OPO, the Office of the Political Ombudsman, needs to be strengthened with the requisite powers. And so on. This argument that we are grown up, we no longer need, it's just not true. The fact is that the one thing that remains more than anything else is not so much the verbal tit for tat and cussing out that goes on campaign platforms. It's the partisanship that the parties continue to use. I mean, a very bad example on part of the PNP back in the 70s was my leader Barnia, which so aggravated Mr. Warmington, right? I mean, that's a piece of racism which is also partisan, right? Very partisan. And to the extent that the PNP now is not sufficiently to these days, I don't know if it's true or not, but it may be that they're not sufficiently disciplining their party followers, that song is forbidden, can never be used again. They would be at fault. But there's political partisanship on both sides. And it's not only the unethical behavior that goes on. Very often it's hard to treat it as unethical or deal with it. For example, discriminating against people who have voted against you by not giving them work, that's going to be very hard to pin down. Very hard to pin down in your investigation. But that is the kind of thing that goes on, and it's very real. So partisanship and bipartisanship goes on very, very strongly these days.
There's an aspect of it, Horace, that is increasingly concerning me, and let me explain. I believe that there was a resolution. Well, I know that there was a resolution in 2012 moved by Mr. Warmington, which called for the abolition of the Office of Political Ombudsman. My recollection is that resolution enjoyed the sympathy, if not support, of some members of the other side. At that time, Mr. Warmington was a member of the opposition. It enjoyed some level of support among government members. I mention that because this announcement broke last week that the political ombudsman whose term of office has just come to an end, that no new appointment is likely to be made. I haven't heard any outrage coming from the current parliamentary opposition. I've seen a concern expressed by the editor of one of our newspapers. Tell me, I recall, let me just add this as well, I recall that with regard to the Integrity Commission, when it sort of absorbed the Contractor General and so on, that this gag clause, as they call it, was put in so that neither you nor I can go on the website any longer to see what contracts were awarded, what government contracts were awarded for the last quarter and to whom, because that is now caught by this business of secrecy. And that was approved. There was no fight in Parliament over it. It seems to have enjoyed consensus across the aisle. From your experience, and to what extent is this a concern of yours, that on some of these issues, particularly having to do with accountability. Whether it is because, the shoe changes feet from time to time, that sometimes these things run into difficulty, into collision, with a kind of collusion across the aisles in Parliament. Are you finding that?
Yes, absolutely. Very true. I mean, this is something identified from as early as 1991 by Carl Stone. Entrapment and the bipartisan entrapment, the partisan and bipartisan entrapment. And Stone identifies specifically this kind of thing that goes on. I mean, another example of it is that both parties very much want the thing that you put in, when you were Prime Minister, the Constituency Development Fund. You remember that?
Yes.
Yes, you put it in. I frankly, I have a high regard for some of the things you did in your regime, very high regard. But that particular one, I think, was a mistake. It's one that the two parties want very much, both of them, because it suits them. Right? It suits them even though it perpetuates the kind of patronage that is exercised by MPs, which should not go on. Right? And, the functions that they're exercising in that regard are things that should be carried out by state agencies. The state agencies are given the funds and the authority, and the bureaucracy gets off their backs and really gets those state agencies going. They're the ones who should be carrying out what are basically social, remedying social needs to do with lighting and roads and a lot of other things like that in parishes and on the ground.
Well, since you've raised it, we're not going to digress today, but yeah. I'm going to make that Constituency Development Fund the subject of a program, and I'm going to invite you back so that we can really delve into it, because part of my concern, it's easy to say leave these things to the bureaucrats.
I know,
but when my roads are not fixed, and I say to the voters, well, don't blame me, the bureaucrat you must blame, and they tell me, well, I never vote for no bureaucrat. And I say, well, I can't do not vote bureaucrat because I can't fire him. I don't have that power. You leave me in a position where nobody going to pay me no mind no more. Nobody going to bother come out and vote. It's a waste of time.
It goes back, though, Bruce, to the whole question of what is the function of the MP, right? Is it legislation and the larger picture?
I think
or is it to be dealing with?
I think we're living in a fool's paradise if we believe that the functions of the MP is simply to go to Parliament and pass laws. In which case, after you're elected, you could just visit the constituency maybe once every quarter just to hear if the people have any views that they would like to express in Parliament when legislation is coming up.
Well, that's why the whole thing has to be rethought very, very carefully.
Well, yeah, we can rethink it, but if this... We seem to be getting into a discussion that I just told you we're going to plan a program to. Okay. Let's get back to the question of the political ombudsman.
Yes.
I was a little disappointed when I got up early this morning to preparing for this program, and I went to the Ombudsman's website to have a look at the annual reports that the Ombudsman has produced. Firstly, there was a report for 2012, nothing for 2013, nothing for 2014. There was one that covered 2015 and 2016. I know the law says that they must send a report annually. Then there was a 2017 and 2018. There's nothing for 2019 or 20. In all of the reports that they had on the website, only one of them stated how many complaints were received and how many investigations were carried out for the year. And I said to myself, if I were somebody who didn't know much about this thing and I was looking at this, I would say, but this is a waste of time. I mean, why have this office if they can't even tell you how many reports, how many investigations they carried out, how many complaints they received.
Which is why Warmington came out and wanted it abolished.
Right.
I found the same thing because I said to myself, well, how many did they do? And I had no statistics to go on to say.
There was 1 year that they said they had 17 complaints, and they had investigated them all.
Mm-hmm.
But the other years, nothing like that.
Precisely. Yeah, no. You see, Warmington wanted the office abolished because he was concerned, it seems to me, I don't know, I may be wrong, by the fact that we're using public money, taxpayers' money, for nothing. We weren't getting a buck for what we were putting in. And this was on the basis that in between elections, very little was going on. Or if it was, relatively small matters of John Blow saying, you call somebody a boy, and the other one saying, something different, and so on.
Well, I would respond to that in two ways. Firstly, we mustn't take our good fortune for granted because it didn't come easy, no? I mean, we used to have some terrible times in our politics. And we mustn't just assume that the kind of violence that that was so rampant in the 60s and 70s, that cannot recur. It can. It's a question of being vigilant. It's a question of the society being sufficiently alert and mobilized and so on to prevent it. But secondly, and I think you alluded to it before, there are other aspects of political relations, some of which are specifically dealt with in the Code of Conduct. That is supposed to be the sort of guide of the political ombudsman. You mentioned the question of the victimization, and that is captured under that provision in the code that speaks about political tribalism. That those things haven't gone away. They may not be as raw and as naked as they were at some point in time, but they are still as effective. And therefore, it seems to me that the need for some office that can intervene still exists. What I would prefer to see this new effort being made now that the term of office of the last ombudsman has come to an end is that a real serious review be made to determine A, what changes do we need to make, what additional powers need to be provided, and importantly, what accountability are we to subject the political ombudsman to?
Well, I have two remarks to make. One is that the basic thing that needs to be changed is the Code of Conduct has to be amended to be more explicit about partisanship. Yes, it has specific cases like the victimization because you didn't vote for me, right? And that's an example. But it doesn't talk generally about partisan behavior. And it needs to, because the partisanship is profound, and that is the root of the problem. That's the root of the tribalism, which is still continuing in a very, very real way. And I can give you, at least I can propose examples. Now, that's a very difficult thing to prove and to show. And the political ombudsman is going to be accused right and left of being biased against this party or biased against that party and so on. So that's something that the PO, the political ombudsman, is going to have to face. There's no question about it. But one of the ways in which he or she can face it, perhaps, is by having a small advisory committee. You referred, or somebody referred, maybe it was Errol, to a tribunal inside the office of the political ombudsman. A small advisory committee or a representative of each of the two main political parties and one or two civil society people, and the ombudsman himself or herself having the casting vote, to really give some guidance on matters like that and some reassurance and some support.
And some insulation from the charge of bias.
Yes, precisely. That is it. To exonerate from that charge. But those are the two things, along with, of course, giving teeth to the authority and power to the political ombudsman to really come down hard with fines, serious fines, on violations. But for example, Bruce, I mean, take me to task if you will, but the Prime Minister, the present Prime Minister, you talked about the stubbornness with regard to the gag clause. I would like to talk about stubbornness with regard to the participation of the JLP in the crime consensus, refusing, after having signed the agreement, to take part. At least Horace Chang has refused, in spite of having the same first name as me, a failure on his part. But the thing is that, to persistently refuse to cooperate with the PNP. The PNP is willing, as far as I can make out, from all the things they have said, willing to cooperate and willing to go along and to talk. And the Prime Minister is not. He had to be dragged to enter after about 2 years of pressure for the Vale Royal talks. He finally agreed on the crime consensus. But having agreed, all that his party has done is to change one or two of the legislation things that were required. But to actually meet and jointly diagnose the problem, diagnose it, identify, as in fact, only P.J. Patterson, of all the Prime Ministers of Jamaica, have actually sat down to have the problem diagnosed. And they came up with, identified 3 committees, plus the West Kingston Commission of Inquiry, came up with the identical answer. Reform the police and lift up the deprived communities. And no Prime Minister to this day has undertaken those 2 things with the thoroughness. Yeah, they've done bits and pieces, but not with the thoroughness that's needed. Right? So first of all, a diagnosis of the problem. I've never heard the present government present any diagnosis of the problem. They go automatically, it goes automatically to what the security forces said. Well, of course you're going to get the security force always option for use of their people. What else do you expect? Right? But that, to me, Mama, is a piece of partisanship. Now, you may disagree, and others will disagree and say I'm being biased. Maybe I am, right? I don't know. Right? I'm willing to, if I were the Ombudsman, I would have to suffer that charge. But the fact of the matter is, the accusation, but the fact of the matter is that it's that kind of thing, to investigate it, to show it, to prove it, right? Or, for example, in the business of buying votes at election, with some of which went on in the last election, the previous one, right? To investigate it and prove it, and conducted by both parties, right? That's the kind of thing that the political ombudsman should be doing. That is partisanship, right? Some of it unethical, some of it, for example, going an individualist rather than a collective way. You can't say it's unethical, but you can say it's contributing to the ongoing crisis.
But have the prior holders of the post, and we have had 2 persons in that post so far, Bishop Blair and Mrs. Donna Parchment Brown, have they done enough though?
No, they haven't.
You mentioned, for example, investigating the buying of votes. A creative mind could easily find the proof, because you can do a sting operation.
I think so. I agree with you on that. No, I don't think they've done enough. I think they've focused too much on the language of the political representatives on campaign trails. All right, that's well and good. And you say, we don't want to bring the violence back, and I agree. But, the 2 parties have learned that lesson from the 1970s, that the violence does not work and will never work. They learned that lesson over the years, in part because of some of the history you indicated. In the 1990s, when PJ brought in, was instrumental in bringing in the legislation which removed violence as a possible instrument for winning an election. And from that day, violence has begun to decline, right? So violence has gone down. But other elements of partisanship have reasserted themselves very, very strongly, because there are other ways to act against partisanship. One is to overemphasizing the popularity and so on of the leader, right? Yes, I know that's very, very difficult to distinguish what is natural popularity as a result of charisma. But, there are things like that, partisanship, right, which is very, very insidious. And that kind of tribalism is what needs to be weeded out. Until that is weeded out, we need a political ombudsman. That's my view.
Well, the argument is going to have to continue. But I'm going to take you up on that idea that you stirred in mind. I want to have a discussion on the Conscience Development Fund, so I'm going to call you back.
Okay.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Horace Levy, public advocate, public watchdog, as I call him, his views on this topic. Today we've been discussing the question of the political ombudsman arising from recent reports which suggest that the government is considering doing away with that office. It's an office that I think it costs us $27 million a year to support that office. And I mean, I imagine some people will argue, well, $27 million could be better used to fix up the St. Anne's Hospital, no? But at the same time, you can't put a dollar price on the value of our democracy and ensuring that our democracy remains robust and strong, but also does not become a source of division and tension any more than democracies necessarily have to be. And therefore, we need to look at it through that prism. It's an issue that is going to require some more discussions. I'm anxious to see the matter brought to the table in Parliament and civil society be allowed to make its contribution to that debate, because I think it's important. We're at the end of the program. It's 2 o'clock and I have to be out of here. So thank you very much for joining me today. It's Jamaica Live on Bridge 99. We'll be back next week, Monday, to begin for the program the month of December, taking us up to Christmas and to the end of the year. God bless you. Have a good week.